Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, I know you want to plug them leaks and you want to study more, so listen to episode number 42 from a couple days ago to discover a way to make poker study a habit in your routine. Hey poker people, it's bonus episode Thursday! Wow, I didn't realize a bonus episode would get you going so much. Anywho, we'll jump right to it. Today's episode is an interview with the Assassinato himself, Alex Fitzgerald. He's a longtime MTT pro and coach, and he's got an upcoming webinar all about the mindset that it takes to be a poker professional. He and I discuss tons of other stuff as well, and he gives the Smart Poker Study podcast listeners a special offer you won't want to miss. You can find links to everything that Alex talks about in this episode's show notes at pod 43. Without further ado, here's the interview with Alex Fitzgerald. Okay, poker people, I've got Alex Fitzgerald, the Assassinato, on the line with me. He is a poker pro with over 3 million in online poker tournament winnings, a prolific poker coach who has taught thousands of students over the years. He writes poker strategy articles and books, has his own blog. He creates poker strategy webinars where he teaches how to think about the game and to crush your opponents. And he actually has a very timely new webinar coming out this Saturday. And he's a podcaster as well as plays poker online through Twitch all the time, where he gives away his strategy insights to faithful viewers. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you. Wow, that was a hell of an introduction. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I just did a little research online. I listen to your podcast, the 1 Hour podcast, all the time, so I know quite a bit about you. You know, one of the things I love about podcasts is when you listen to them, you really get to know the hosts and understand them, and you almost feel like friends with them, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a real reaction to everything on TV right now is a soundbite or something like that, you know, and then people have just gone the complete other direction on podcasts. It's just an hour and a half of, you know, a couple people chatting and they're just opening up and letting you know what they're actually thinking. I do love that about the format.
So do I, absolutely. And I know that you listen to Adam Carolla a whole lot, and so do I. He's one of my favorites. Are there other podcasts that you're really into?
I listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast is really good for picking up really good information. The only problem with it is it does get a little dry sometimes. It's not. The Adam Carolla podcast is informative at times if you're really into Adam's worldview and you really want to. There's a lot of good philosophy tidbits, but a lot of times, you know, it's really funny, but it's 30 minutes of him ranting about, you know, like his kids throwing away leftovers, which to me is hilarious because I go through that here, but it's not. It kind of feels like empty calories, you know what I mean? But Tim Ferriss is the opposite. It's just like, it's a ton of really great material, but it's also super dry a lot of the time. I listened to the Freakonomics podcast. I listened to the School of Greatness podcast.
With Lewis Howes. That's a great one.
Yeah, he's a really good interviewer. He's really good at what he does. I'm kind of struggling to come up with any off the top. I listen to all the Adam Carolla stuff, Reasonable Doubt, Adam and Dr. Drew show. I love Reasonable Doubt is a great podcast. I love seeing. I'm reading that guy's book, Mark Garagos, the defense attorney. It is incredible what goes on in the justice system in the United States. It's incredible to learn about, and I love the podcast just to, you know, to get his down and dirty view on what's going on with all the court cases of the day.
Yeah, so do I. It really surprised me the first time he started talking about current court cases, because it just shocked me that a lawyer could talk so openly about the cases he's dealing with right now.
Yeah, I guess he actually got an injunction for doing that one time, but he's really cavalier about what he puts. His book, it's called Mistrial. Like, he gets even, once the case is over, he can say whatever he wants, but it's really interesting. Like he said the first time he talked to Michael Jackson, he was really taken aback because he was really lucid. He doesn't actually have a very high pitched voice. He didn't have a very high pitched voice. He said he actually had his voice when he was speaking to you was at more of a baritone. He just doesn't.
Oh.
Yeah, he didn't play it up when he was doing press junkets or whatever. And he said he said that the first time he talked to him, he was extremely lucid and he felt like he got the whole story. And the second time he talked to him, he was just really despondent and off kilter. And it's just interesting because you think, like, is he going to get future clients if he knows that past clients are going to be written about? You know, if are future clients going to want to be written about in a future book? His stuff on the Scott Peterson case was really interesting because, you know, I'd only heard the version in the news, which was, oh my God, this horrible person killed his wife. And when you
got off with it.
Yeah, and Scott Peterson got convicted.
I'm thinking somebody else.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
No, definitely. I know which one you're thinking of. But yeah, he's on death row right now, and you read what the actual case was. It's really flimsy. You know what I mean? I'm not saying the guy didn't do it. It's just you know, when you read what the court system is supposed to be like, then you read how that one played out. And what the influence was of the media. It was really fascinating. You know, I love that stuff. I like to learn a lot, like you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm big on learning. Big on every day. I try to learn. You know, I mean, they always say, you know, stay young by learning something new every day. I really try to learn 5 or 6 new things every day. You know, I'm all about learning.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, look how lucid Doyle Brunson is, and he's it's just because he's always trying to work on something. He's always, I don't know. There was some old phrase like poker players only get old when they stop playing poker. So I'm like, no, Doyle, come back. You know, you got to play. Don't get old. Don't get older.
Yep. Well, you know, we jumped right into podcasts and stuff, and I went over that quick bio about you in the beginning, but I would imagine a lot of my listeners might not know who you are. Can you give us a brief snippet of your poker journey so far?
Yeah, sure. Well, you guys want the like life version or just what I've done in poker? Like, do you want like the actual like life story or?
Well, maybe just the poker. I know we're going to plug, and I'm going to plug your 1 Outer podcast. I've talked about it before in the show. So in every single episode, you and Barry go deep into your past and your current, you know, what you've got going on in the future plans and everything. So I think if people want their, yeah. So let's just hit the poker today.
Sure. Yeah, no, some people always want to be like, where are you from? And I started playing poker in high school. A bunch of kids were, you know, they were just playing around at lunch, and they were playing on credit. I jumped in. I don't think I had $2 in my name, but I figured I'll scrounge it up somewhere, and I just got really hooked from that point on. First 3 years I played poker was live in the Seattle area. Didn't really do that well. The 4th year I got online. And a friend of mine loaned me $50 to play. I was 17 years old. He loaned me $50 to play on his account. I made $30 that night, luck boxing, $5 sit and goes. I sent back the $50. From that $30, I've used the money to travel the world, and I've lived on 4 different continents. I've played a lot of 10Ks. I've lived in mansions with private beaches. I've lived in condos in South Korea and stuff like that. And I never deposited. It all came from that. But I mean, that's the really short version. The long version is my first year as a pro was largely a failure. The first 3 years I played recreationally, and I mean by recreationally I played, you know, I get out of school and we go play a game Friday 5 o'clock, and we wouldn't stop till, you know, Monday morning 3 a.m. Come back, crash a couple hours, like literally would not stop, like would not sleep, or if we did sleep it was like 4 hours. And then we would go to school. And the first 3 years I did that, I just didn't make money. I just loved poker so much. I was trying to learn it. My first year as a pro. So it wasn't until about year 5 I started really doing well. And that's when I final tabled the EPT in what at the time was the largest field tournament in European history, EPT San Remo. I had a number of F-Tops final tables, W-Coupe final tables. The last couple of years, I've had W-Coupe final tables, F-Tops final tables. Tournament poker has become a little tougher the last couple of years. Just people are just much more educated about it. I mean, it's even weird to me you guys have like a podcast like this, because I remember back in the day I would tell people how much I'm studying, and people were like, study, man, math is for losers, dude.
Yep,
Like
yep.
the real players know it. So if you had like a podcast, like well, I mean, it's pretty cool to me now, because like the more devoted people are doing a lot better, the more humble people are doing a lot better, but it's definitely it's far more competitive these days. But yeah, just in the last year, I've been playing for about 10 years. The last year I final tabled the million. I final tabled not the million on Stars, the million on
ACR.
ACR, yes. And you know, I had a W Coupe final table recently, and I had a W Coupe second chance win. All of these are on the videos. I had an F Tops final table last year. So yeah, it's been a fun ride. I like poker. Poker been very good to me.
Great, great. One thing I want to ask you about real quick is, you said you lived on 4 different continents,
Yes,
in
sir.
tons of different, living conditions. You're in Costa Rica right now. What brought you to Costa Rica? Was it meeting your wife, or was it Black Friday, or something else?
I'm really like you, because you don't assume it's Black Friday. Everybody just go in every interview. They said moved to Costa Rica after Black Friday, and no, well, I had a bunch of buddies I was backing 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. Anyway, yeah, 6 years ago. You know, we were doing pretty well, and we were like, well, you know, why don't we all live in the same house, and I can teach you how to play poker, and you know, you can run a few errands for me, right? And I'll put the rent down, right? And you guys can put some nominal amount. And we looked at getting a place in LA, and it was like $20,000 or something.
Yeah,
yeah, right, for like a 4-bedroom or something. And then one of the guys looked up a place in Costa Rica and found it was, you know, for $4,000 a month. There was a house with a private beach, and it like 6 bedrooms, and we were like, the hell with it, man. We're gonna, you know, we'll take that, and we'll go do that. Well, we came down and we found out you get what you pay for a little bit. Like, it was a mansion and stuff like that, but there's a lot of stuff, like there's no internet really close. So you get 3 internet connections, and all 3 of them can fall down at some point. So you got to get satellite internet, and then it's a huge place. So you got to clean it up all the time. So you got to hire somebody to come in. It eventually started getting pretty expensive. It wasn't that bad, but it was a good time while we were there. We had a lot of fun, but at the end, yeah, I met my wife through friends, and she is just a really incredible person, just a really sweet person. And my friends decided to move on. The backing thing didn't really work out. They wanted, you know, the original plan was, let's go check out a bunch of countries. Let's have a lot of fun. They wanted to move on to Japan, which I really wanted to go to, because I studied Japanese for 3 years in high school. I can't speak a word now, but I really wanted to go and try to learn again and really experience the culture. But I met my wife, and I was really happy. So I was like, all right, you guys go on. And they went, and they had a lot of fun. But I moved kind of into the city, and eventually I moved up into the mountains. Really nice, really nice area in Costa Rica. And it's really, if you're near the, like in the mountains, like the people are just really nice, but at the same time, they're a little more down to earth, and they're not really used to tourists. So when they see you, they just go, oh, hey, how are you doing? And they don't really do the whole, like, yeah, I was living in a part of Costa Rica that's, it's called Guanacaste. It's where most of the poker players live. I really do not like this area. The heat is unbearable. But also it'd be like, I kept like getting into arguments with people, because like one time I ordered a pizza, and they show up at the door and they were like, it's $30. And I said, what is this, effing Manhattan? Like, what do you mean $30, right? And then I was like, how much would it be if I was Costa Rican, right? And that has never happened to me, like, closer to the capital. Like, every place I've ever gone to, the taxi drivers try to rip me off. I've never had a taxi driver out of the hundreds of taxi drivers here try to rip me off. The people are always very nice. Really like the people. I really like my wife's family. And I'm here, and it's been 6 years. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, that's great. Did you ever get a chance? Did your buddies actually make it to Japan? Did
They did make it
they
to
go?
They did make it to Japan. They did.
Okay.
They had a great time there. Are you? I assume. I
Yeah,
assume you're of Japanese descent.
yes, I am. I'm half Japanese, and actually after college I went to Japan for a year and a half, and I
Oh, how
taught
cool!
English. Yeah, I taught English with a private company, not with the JET program like you might have heard of,
Right.
Japanese English teaching. But this was a company called Eon, and I just went over there, lived there for a year and a half. One of my goals when I went there was to learn Japanese, but all of my friends were fellow English speaking
Oh
teachers,
no.
and all of my students, we hung out with students after class and on the weekends all the time, go on not really field trips, but just go out and experience the city. They would show me around and stuff. But they were so intent on speaking English that I didn't put in the Japanese practice that I wanted to. So
Really?
my Japanese is super, super poor, and it's a
Yeah.
bummer, it's a bummer that I missed out on becoming fluent in Japanese, but it was just such a great experience. I loved it. Did you get a chance to go over there and visit your friends while they were there?
No, I never did. You know, it's the dumbest thing. I studied Japanese for 3 years
Hmm.
in high school, so I moved to Korea for a year. So I like, and everybody's like, "Why did you come?" The really weird thing was back then I was right out of high school, so I did still speak some of it. A lot of the like Koreans I knew had to speak Japanese for business, but they didn't speak
Yeah.
English. So we would, I would tell them what I was ordering or where I was going or what, stuff like that in Japanese. But yeah, I did get to, I was in Japan for like a day or two. I didn't really get to experience the culture as much as I
No.
wanted to, but the people are really friendly. They're really, uh, I had a really good time when I was over in that part of the world. It was really interesting. And it was really interesting to me how everybody tries to put their best foot forward with, foreigners when you go over to this happened in China too. When I was in China, South Korea, and Japan, everybody was, they would say like, well, normally we don't allow this, but you're a foreigner, so we want to show you a good time. I was like, wow. And it's like, in America we just curse out foreigners. Good for you guys.
Yeah.
Like, this is this is amazing. That's so cool. So you're there for a year and a half. How was their English? I was always really curious about that.
Oh, their English is great.
Really?
They go to school starting in elementary school. Well, their reading and writing is really good. Like they can read it and write it, but when it comes to speaking, I guess the reading and writing part that they learn in elementary within the brain doesn't translate so well to
Right.
verbalizing it. But they take some English lessons, and I did an after school not a program, but we had students after school that would come in and like
Oh,
old retired men, and then a lot of what is it called? Home wives? Yeah.
Yeah, and
Housewives.
so
Housewives.
it wasn't the JUCO programs, not the like
No,
cram schools. Okay, so it's
No,
actually
nothing
more
like
fun.
that.
Yeah, I was about to say that must have been pretty intense if you're doing
Yeah.
the test prep. So it was just housewives and
Housewives and students after school who just wanted to learn English, and they caught on really quickly because they did learn to read and write through elementary school, like maybe starting in first or second grade. They get started on English and stuff. So overall their ability is really good to speak. And a lot of the media that they consume, especially when it comes to movies and a ton of music too, is all English, from
Right.
either America, Western, or like, European stuff too. So they get really they're just really comfortable with the English language, even though they can't speak it so well. They can hear and read and write a lot of it.
Right. No, that's really cool because I studied I studied Japan quite a bit when I was taking the language, and there were so many stories of there was a story that the United States came over after World War II, and as a present they gave a like model train to the Japanese, and they said, yeah, we're building these in our country. And they came back 2 years later and there were trains all over Japan, and they were like,
Oh.
hey, we didn't send our engineers here to help you with this. And they said, well, you sent us this model. And we
And
just
that's all we needed.
we just learned from that. And it was always, yeah. And it was, there were so many just genius ideas when you study the culture. And my biggest difficulty was just always the language barrier. And I thought once they start speaking English, like this country is going to do so well, economically and stuff like that. But yeah, most of what I'm always curious about the English because in Brazil, my father lives in Brazil, and they learn English for 12 years there from the start to the finish of school, and they do not speak a word. Whereas in Costa Rica, there pretty much isn't any English in the schools, but you will go up to a person and bumble in Spanish, and they'll say in perfect American English, oh, can I help you? And he'll be like, how do you speak like this? Oh, practicing. Americans come around, and they'll have perfect intonation, a really clear accent. So it's always been really fascinating to me who picks up on what I guess is the international language now, English, and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Or what's, and it's really cool to hear Japan's coming to the forefront.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, you said your dad lives in Brazil and they learn English all the way through 12th grade. Is it maybe a pride thing that they don't want to speak it once they get out of school?
No, they try. They're the nicest people in the world. They're so kind, but they're I think they're really embarrassed. And when they do try to speak, there's a lot of. I just don't think their education system is as good there. I believe in Costa Rica, like the education system is very humble, but the people are pretty bright, right? Like when it comes to like book smarts, right? In Brazil, a lot of the people are very wise when it comes to life, but I get the idea the schools don't stress a lot of it's not a lot of rote memorization, which is good when you're making well-rounded individuals, but when it comes to something like English, where you do have to memorize a lot of vocabulary, it's not going to be the best system. So they're really good with a lot of different like interpersonal relationships. I've seen them be really good at, and just as far as like life experience, they're really good at speaking calmly and explaining themselves and directing projects and stuff like that. But for whatever reason, I don't know why the English, the English is just not really stressed there. I get the idea if it is, they'll. I've talked to a few Brazilians where they went to different schools and they just speak fluently. It's really they speak better than I do, and it's pretty. The poker players from Brazil speak a lot of English, which is always amazing to me because they just learn through the chat. Because I'm always wondering like what kind of English you would be learning through a poker chat, but apparently it's pretty good.
Okay, good. Probably all the training videos that I bet they watch on YouTube and stuff too.
Yeah, I imagine too. It's really interesting how like poker strategy is divided. Like Brazil has a very unique poker strategy that's very wonderful to learn from because it's a very insular community and there wasn't as much judgment when they were coming up. That way a player like Pasagno could come to the forefront. Whereas Portugal, even though they speak Portuguese, the exact same language, they speak English constantly. In Portugal, like if you watch Bugs Bunny in Portugal, it's in English. If you watch Bugs Bunny in Brazil, it's in Brazilian Portuguese. So the Portuguese became much better, I guess, book smart players because they spoke English with a lot of the Germans and a lot of the Americans. But the Brazilians really kind of kept to their own forms and kept to their own ways, and that really brought up some really unconventional players that are really exciting to watch, and really from what I do for a living, it's very exciting to learn from. Because if one guy, this is something Tim Ferriss talks about, that when you're trying to learn something rapidly, you should always ask somebody who is really good at this, who shouldn't be. And I heard him ask that, right? Because there's a lot of guys that are fantastic at poker, but they just have ungodly good reads, right, in the moment, and you can't really learn from them. But I asked that question back in 2012. I was like, who is good at poker, who should not be? And everybody said, Pasagno has an incredible graph, but I hate that guy, right? Like, this guy's so bad at poker. And I said, okay, I looked at his graph. His graph was gorgeous back then. I think he's moved up to high stakes now, and understandably has experienced more variance. But I was like, well, why is he so consistent? And I tried to break down mathematically what he was doing, and it all made perfect sense. I don't even know if he knew, but if he had grown up in Portugal, I don't know if he would have ever become that player, because all the English-speaking players would have given him a hard time. And then the Portuguese players who learned by proxy through them would have given him a hard time, and he would have been dissuaded. And now you're seeing this. The Brazilians, I notice, are really speaking English a lot more now and coming around to more traditional poker ideas. So now the next guy I'm looking for an anomaly is I'm looking for a Russian anomaly, because they have their own, all the former Soviet states have their own way of playing poker, and it's very interesting. I think we're going to start seeing some fantastic players come out of that front.
Great. Awesome. Well, you mentioned Pisagno, and I've watched a couple of your webinars. I've watched You Flat Too Much and Dissecting the Donk Bit. Those were just incredible webinars. I learned so much. I have
Thank you.
That's a Check Raise Fool, and I haven't watched it yet. And I definitely need to. I'll be purchasing that Why Pisagno Was Right webinar from you as well too.
I can just send it to you. It's
Oh.
don't worry about it. But yeah, there.
Okay.
I mean, wait, for you guys who don't know, Sky writes into One Outer podcast and like helps us with a bunch of things. He was like, I noticed you guys had a problem with this. I figured it out. And it's like, oh, cool. I mean, this is just of course I'm going to help you out now that you help me out. This is what a lot of the young guys don't understand, right? You make yourself useful and then the pro's going to go out of their way to help you. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's going to take me literally 20 seconds to send you that video, but that video is going to help you quite a bit, right? And,
Absolutely.
and so it means, it's not going to take me anything, but you've already, a lot of people are like, well, how'd you come up in poker? It's like, well, I had to help out a lot of pros with a lot of things. Back when I was starting, pros were drug addicts, right? They made a ton of money and they liked to smoke weed all day, and they weren't good at basic things such as getting a visa or booking their plane tickets or stuff like that. So what I did when I was like 19 and 20 is I just became their booking agent, and I did a lot of stuff for them. And, I just make sure they were on their crap. Like, hey, don't walk through the border with a joint in your pocket. Throw that away, right? Stuff like that, And then eventually, I was hanging around them and helping them. And they were like, hey, Alex, I can back you, if you want help. And it's like, all right. And then, we were on our way. But a lot of guys just write me an email. And it's like, hey, man, I really love poker. I really want to take it to the next step. Could you back me and teach me everything you know? And I'm like, I don't think you understand. There's nothing in it for me. Exactly. I'm not trying to be like a selfish person, but if there was any help at all, like if you could help me with, I had one guy, a lot of guys write me. It's really funny because the guys that write me like you, who are like, hey, I can help you with this, this, and this. When I offer something for free, you guys always are like, oh, no. I feel bad about that. And it's like, no. I want to help you, right? I feel great helping you. And that's what I want. I want to feel good helping you. And then we both lift each other up, right? If I feel like
Absolutely.
I'm just not doing anything, we just don't do anything. It's just, yeah. Anyway, that's the thing that's always amazing to me about poker players these days. There's a lot of like asking for something for nothing. And I don't get where they think that's going to work or why that's like, you wouldn't run up to, you wouldn't, I mean, not that this is the equivalent, but you wouldn't run up to Barry Bonds and be like, could you teach me everything about hitting? And he's going to go, okay, wait, hold on, kid. Like,
yeah.
Like what my time is pretty valuable. You know what I mean? I can help a lot of people with that. Why should I help you? And you got to have an answer to that question. So yeah, sorry. I just go off on rants and,
no, I'm good with it. Yeah, I listen to your podcast all the time. I'm used to it, man. I enjoy it. I love it. And then well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you offering that webinar. I'm definitely going to take you up on that, and I'll watch the crap out of that one. And just like I do with all your stuff, I take copious notes,
Good.
And it's really helped me improve my game. So thank you very much for all that.
Oh, no problem, man. Glad to help.
And yeah, sure thing. And then speaking of the webinar, you have your new webinar coming out called The Professional's Mindset. And I'm looking at the flyer that you sent out for it right now. It's called The Professional's Mindset. You have a subtitle. I think that's called a subtitle, but it says unlearn the damaging lies you've been taught about poker and create a real path to success. Can you give us like a little preview of some of the stuff you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, sure. Essentially, I called it The Professional's Mindset because a couple years ago, I was doing a lot of these webinars. I was doing a lot of coaching, and I was really enjoying that. But there was a lot of guys that wrote me, and we would do a lesson and it'd go well, and they'd have some improvement. They'd have a little improvement, but then it wouldn't keep up, right? Like they kept needing to come back to me for lessons to get like the next tidbit, and I kept saying like, look, I realized I needed to come up with a way for them to learn by themselves constantly and to work as a professional. Even if you were not seeking to become a professional poker player, you need to treat your business as if you were a professional. So if you still like your job, you want to keep your job, I think that's or you're going to school, I think that's a really professional decision. And there's a lot of poker players that got their college degree or still own a business. I mean, this goes for anything. Like Kurt Vonnegut owned a car dealership the entire time he was a writer. And there's a lot of guys that a lot of the most successful, happiest people I know work in a number of different jobs. And they are not just, they have a bunch of different careers. They like to have different focuses. But if you want to get better at poker and you want to get better at poker very rapidly, which, let's admit, we all want to do, there is a process for this. And I noticed once I took those players who were really smart people, a lot of these people were much smarter than I am, and I figured out what was wrong with their process as far as their learning. They started learning by leaps and bounds and started going really far in the game. And I usually do these webinars by the time like I have to repeat the material constantly, because then if somebody books a private lesson, I can be like, hey, check out this video, and then I don't have to repeat myself or waste 4 personal lessons on that. They can just use it as homework. But it's also good because, if you don't have $210 for an hour of training, you can spend $100 on this and you can get, I'll tell you what, if you guys sign up and you mention this podcast, I will give you Why Pisagno is Right for free as well. That's a $50 value. I'll throw that out there. If you guys mention this podcast, I'll give you guys a special deal. I'll give you the same, because I can't just give it to your host. That's not fair, right? I got to give it to all of y'all. But if you sign up for the Professional's Mindset, but it's essentially, I found out, because people would always go, oh, you must be pretty bright to do as well as you've done at poker. And I'd always go, I don't really think so. Because I say this on the podcast all the time. Nobody believes me, but they kicked me out of math in high school because I was getting D's, and they were like, yeah, okay, you're fine, you'll graduate. Just, don't burden the teacher anymore. And when I went to apply for college, I took a placement exam, and they said, yep, you need to go back to 9th grade mathematics. So when I tell people, I've become better since this time, but when I tell people you need an 8th grade math level to do all of this, there's a reason I came up with that. It's because apparently that's where I'm at, right? And all this stuff is very easy to do. And then I realized what the problem was is people just didn't know how to approach it. How do I study? How do I know what to study? When I study, how do I do it in a way that I can memorize it? Do I just look at all the materials? Or do I look at one material? How do I assimilate? How do I become this process? How does this process become something that I can focus on every day? What is the way that I can play poker? So there's a lot of times, like we talk about in the webinar, like how do you simulate 1,000 hours of play in 1 hour? A lot of people, when they saw that, they were like, that's BS. You can't do that, right?
That's the thing that really caught my attention. As soon as I saw this flyer, I was all, whoa. And I know you're not a bullshitter. So It's obvious that you are going to teach this concept. And I was so looking forward to it. That's one of the things I wanted to ask you about.
Well, and it's actually, I feel like I'm mystifying it a bit. Like, that is true. There was one guy who was going to advertise this, and he sent it back to me, and he was like, I don't like this ad copy. It seems like BS to me. And I was like, I promise you all of this is true, right? I can show you the material right now, right? And but like, here's the thing. You'll learn something in an hour of study you would have not learned in a million hours of playing poker, because it's just not possible. The human mind is not able to do it, right? So let's take a situation like, let's say you're about 30 big blinds deep, and a guy, you have pocket eights and the board is 9-5-2. Okay, a guy c-bets in the cutoff, you're on the button. Here's your options. You can call down, and your call down requirements are, if the turn's an overcard, you call again because you think he double barrels that turn too much. But on the river, you fold if another overcard comes. If another overcard doesn't come, you call. Because you know for a fact he's jamming all flush draws. You know for a fact he's jamming all missed flush draws, right? And let's say, and you fold if the flush draw comes in, right? And then the other option is you turn your eights into a bluff and you raise fold, right? And what is the correct answer for that? I've asked people who've played 10 million hands at poker. They have no idea. The reason for that is the human mind is not capable of memorizing every time that it worked. And then not only didn't work, but the first problem is people usually have one play that they do there. They either call or they would never dream of turning their hand into a bluff. That's usually the one play they do. If they have ever tried to turn their hand into a bluff, they haven't done it enough times that they could take all the chips, translate it to big blinds, divide it by all the trials, and then get the expectation. So most people you ask, nobody knows what the right answer is. You can set up with Card Runners EV in 15 minutes to find out what is the right answer here. And a lot of times what you're going to find out is the raise folding, turning your hand into a bluff, is better versus a guy who's a perpetual barreler. It's not, there are occasions where it's more profitable to call down, but you need to know that the guy is just firing everything you can imagine. You need to know the guy like had a fight with his girlfriend or something. And like, but most of the time there's so many variables on the side of calling down. And the great thing about tournament poker is the leverage is such that if you raise and the stacks are short enough, the guy really has to decide whether to move all in or fold. And if you put the guys moving all in, even with second pair, even if you have him with the 5+ jamming on the 9-5-2 board, you're going to find that it's more profitable to turn your hand into a bluff. Now, that's something I was just working on with my student the last session because he had a question about that. How good is it to turn your hand into a bluff? And I said, let's go into it. Now, I've done, let's say I do 5, 10, 20 of these, and I keep getting the right response, which I can do in an hour. Like in an hour of doing Card Runners EV calcs, I can find the answer to a particular situation. I can apply that for the rest of my days. I will be making money. A lot of times the profit is 100% greater than what it, like if calling down was good for 1 big blind and raise folding was good for 2.2 big blinds, that is quite a bit. That is going to compound, that is going to become quite a bit of profit within the upcoming years. And you would have never learned that if you did not take 45 minutes to pull out Card Runners EV and focus on a particular situation. The professional's mindset is about specifically what topics you should be focusing on, how you should be doing it, and also just the methodology around learning, what I've used. And I wanted to see if this was right. So something that was pretty funny is like, I kind of want an experiment, right? Where I could try to rapidly learn something. So I decided it was going to be battle rap, right? So I applied this to, and I decided, this is something we talk about in the webinar is like, you need to set like time frames for doing things. So I was friends with Thesaurus, who's he's a really distinguished battle rapper, and him and I were like, all right, we're going to battle at the WSOP, right? I'd never battled in a fixed setting like that in my life, right? And I went there and I had a really good reaction, and he said that's the most comfortable I've ever seen anybody in their first match. And then a largely African-American league out of the South said, all right, you want to come on, you want to battle? And now it's like something I do for fun, and I didn't do it a couple of years ago. And it was just, a lot of the rapid learning stuff translates to a lot of other things like quantifying and exploring, applying, reevaluating, applying it again. But there's a real process to it that a lot of people, that really trips people up the first time. And when I was trying to apply this to different formats, it was very tricky. But then I was able to come back to poker and I said, oh, okay, this is what's tripping people up, right? I just tried to learn something new for the first time. I can see what would be very difficult if you're learning something for the first time as it applies to poker. And just kept going through that. And I've tested this material on my, as you said in the intro, it's about 1,000+ students. It works really well. And the guy this was the claim that everybody was like, this makes me feel like you're selling penis pills, right? And I was like, did you really have a guy who's playing $20 MTTs that's now playing EPT high rollers? Yes, I did. He's a Portuguese pro. I don't know if he wants me saying his name, but probably everybody's going to guess who he is based on that. But when he came to me, he was playing $20 MTTs. And we started on this process, and he took it to heart, right? He just focused on one thing, really applied it, really evaluated it, came back, reevaluated with a coach, reapplied, and we go into the process a little deeper than what I'm talking about right now, and we have all the slides and everything to explain it. And eventually, yeah, he plays the circuit now, and he's doing it on his own. He's not backed. So it's been, a pretty meteoric rise. Obviously, this is an outlier. This doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, but those kind of success stories just kind of speak to your proficiency as a coach, and
Right.
And if you could do that for one person, it's possible others can do it as well.
Exactly.
Assuming that they have that mindset that Portuguese player has.
Exactly. And even if you don't have that, I'll be frank with you guys. A lot, I do not love poker in the way a lot of the best players do. That's all a lot of my friends can do is talk about poker, hang out with poker players and stuff like that. Poker is my job, which I enjoy, right? But I don't, just like a lot of people, I don't want to be talking about my job constantly when I'm off work. And that's what I think separates the highest performers from guys like me who are grinded out pros. And I do make a good living, but I sure as hell don't play EPT high rollers, right? But this gives me a unique perspective, which is, what if you want to make decent money at poker, but you don't want to make poker the entire focus of your life? What if you want to use poker as a way to propel to other interests, to business, or something you want to study, or if you want to travel, or if you just want to make a good living and kind of retire a bit, right? And just have more time for yourself. Because my interest with poker was always, my first interest was poker was like, man, these records are really expensive that I'm trying to buy. I really wish I had more money for CDs, right? Or manga, Japanese comics are really expensive and I really want to buy more of these. So I had to find a way to make money. A lot of people want to travel, but they don't know what they're going to do for a job when they travel. And, if you don't teach English, if you don't have the degree to teach English, that's a wonderful opportunity. But a lot of people, they just can't do that for whatever reason. What are you going to do if you're going to travel? And this is a way you can create a life of your own making. And my goal is not to get you to play an EPT high rollers, because that's very difficult. And that's going to take a level of devotion that only a few of my students have had. My goal is to get you making a good living, right? And we discuss how you make that good living with any amount of talent, right? Any amount of talent. How can you make a good living at poker? That's really what the professional's mindset is about. It's about leverage. How do you learn the fastest? How do you make the most money? We're not focusing as much, right? This webinar is going to be about the skill portion. It's more about how do you develop the skills to start making the good money. And we talk about what kind of money you can make, where you can make it, what you can do with it, how you can work it in poker. But we're going to have another webinar. I was writing about that and I was getting really excited, but then I realized this webinar is going to be 7.5 hours if I write everything I know about making money from poker. So we're going to have another webinar on that upcoming within the next month. But yeah, it's essentially, you can tell I'm getting excited as I talk about it, because it's just, I never, growing up, it was just about whatever job you could work, whatever job was out there. And there just wasn't a whole lot of them. And this is just a way of making a life of your own making. And that's really exciting to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a great webinar. And I know that you're, like you said earlier, a big fan of Tim Ferriss. And it sounds like you are applying a lot of the lessons that he taught within the 4-Hour Chef and a few of his other books. You're applying that to poker, which is right up my alley. It's something that I've been wanting to. Yeah.
No, it's really, I tried to apply everything he did to poker with my students, and my students were really patient. it was really cool because they would come to me with problems, and I'd say, oh, this is where they got it, because like you read it in like the 4-Hour Chef, which for those of you who don't know was Tim Ferriss's very horribly titled effort at teaching you how to rapidly learn anything. He used cooking as one of the examples, and he named it the 4-Hour Chef. But it's I tried to apply a lot of that stuff with my students, and seeing where the snags were with a lot of them was really rewarding, because once you get over that, you start seeing the process work more fluidly. And there's a lot of times, we'd be doing like an hour lesson, but we do like an hour and 20 minutes because I really wanted to understand, what they got tripped up on so the next person didn't do it. And yeah, we ran this through my friend, a Marine studying psychology, and we just made sure. That was the other like really huge advantage, is like, has this ever worked in a clinical setting, right? And if it hadn't, it's like, okay, well, cut that out. Like there's some parts in this I know are going to be a little controversial. Like I'm good friends with Trisha Cardner, and one of my things is sleep, right? How much sleep. We talk about how to get more time during the day. My contention is most grown men notice no difference when they sleep 7 hours versus 8 hours. But that 1 hour a day is huge if you can apply it to poker, right? But there's a lot of there's a lot of psychologists that are like, well, if you want to get banged up really quick, just start sleeping less, right? So, we really took it to like, okay, are there studies about sleep hygiene? And there were some things like that. That one cleared. It turned out.
All right, sorry to cut in here, everybody. We had some technical difficulties, but Alex and I resolved it, and we got right back on the call, and then I came back with this. Yeah, so I'm totally looking forward to this webinar, and for all the Smart Poker Study podcast listeners, it's coming up this Saturday, March 12th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the webinar cost is $99.99, and I set up a special link which will take you directly to Alex's website, which is pokerheadrush.com, and to the page with this flyer, The Professional's Mindset, to give you information on how to sign up. But if you want to go to smartpokerstudy.com/TPM for The Professional's Mindset. So that was smartpokerstudy.com/TPM. It'll take you directly to Alex's site where you can read the flyer for yourself and follow the directions to sign up for the webinar. I hope you join.
Myself as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so thank you very much for that offer as well of the free Why Pisagno Was Right webinar. I really do appreciate that. I'm sure every listener that takes you up on that is going to learn so much from it. I can't wait.
Oh, no problem, man. I'm happy to help. It's a good time.
Good. I recently listened to, speaking of, earlier we mentioned the 1 Hour podcast. You've actually done 80 episodes of that, and that just blows my mind that I can listen to you and Barry go back and forth for 80 weeks now,
160 hours, if you really think about it. That's pretty. Oh, no, it's not 2 hours, but 80 hours. Yeah, that's quite a bit. My God.
Oh, it is, without a doubt. And it's been great. I love hearing you guys go back and forth, and then the awesome questions that you answer, or the awesome answers you give to questions, I guess I should say.
Oh,
thank you very much for that. But in the last podcast, number 80, I listened to that, and you had mentioned that you just finished the first draft of a new book. And you said it was a ton of fun to write. And can you tell us a little bit about that book and when it might be coming out and how we can, well, I guess we'll end up learning more as time goes on, but can you tell us about the book?
Yeah, The Myth of Poker Talent kind of follows the same the same guidelines that we were discussing. It's more about, again, pretty much everything I write is about how can the average person become a poker professional, because when I was coming up, I was really frustrated because constantly the message was, you're not good enough. And I wasn't really successful the first like 4 years. And there was a lot of times I wanted to give up. I probably would have given up if, I had something else to go back to. I just really didn't at that time. I didn't really have anything else working for me. So really, with The Myth of Poker Talent, it's really focusing on the strategies of how can you become better way more rapidly. We discuss a lot of the study strategies. Essentially, the professional's mindset is about how do you learn very rapidly, how do you make the time to learn, how do you how do you take in the lessons very quickly, what you should be focusing on. The Myth of Poker Talent is a real exploration of all of that. And that's really, there's over 150 pictures in the book. It's really like, if you open this software and you press this, it's going to do this. So there's stuff like, how do you find out if a triple barrel bluff is profitable or not? I show you how to do that 2 different ways. How do you prove if a check raise is profitable? When should you donk bet? When should you raise pre-flop as a bluff? When should you move all in? And I give you all the tools to solve this yourself. And we discuss going from big to small, big topics to small topics, stuff that happens all the time. Like why Pisegno was right was a very natural first webinar because it was about opening, and it was about opening strategy. And things have changed a little bit since that came out, because back then people didn't flat you as much. Now we discuss a little more. In the video we do discuss if people flat more, what you should be doing. But if the Myth of Poker Talent is really an update of that. When people are flatting, what they should be flatting, what raise sizes you should be doing. What is the evidence behind all of this? That's the other thing. A lot of people want to challenge my work. And, well, actually, they want to challenge me. They say, like, Alex, I don't like this advice I gave you. And I always say, it's not my advice. This is what the process spit out. This is what my experiments spit out, right? Now, anybody can do this. Anybody can work an equity calculator. I prove that in the book, right? If you can work, and you don't even need an equity calculator, you can just use a hand range visualizer, right? And this goes for anyone. Whenever somebody says, no, you should do it my way, you go, okay, great, show me the evidence, right? And then a lot of times in poker, people go, the evidence is I just won a live tournament. It's like, well, that's not good enough for me. Excuse me if I don't really find that convincing, because I've seen some real dumbasses win tournaments, right? Excuse me, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear here. I'm not trying to
No,
swear.
that's fine. No problem.
But I've seen, it's not really good. And we talk about variance a lot in the professional's mindset and the Myth of Poker Talent, and why so many of the people who are teaching you really don't know what they're talking about. And I'm not telling you to trust me. I'm telling you to check my methodology. If you find anything wrong, and I'm sure there's going to be this is pretty, as you can imagine, this is pretty a contentious subject. When a lot of what I'm going to say, what a lot of the pros are doing is wrong, and I have the math to back it up. One that's really interesting in the book, I just do the equity calculations. Should you stop and go, or should you move all in? The common wisdom is from 11 to 15 big blinds, you should just move all in every single time pre-flop, because it's a pretty big rejam. There's nothing mathematically that proves that. There's nothing that proves that. You should be stopping and going every single time, because you think about it, when you're looking at a flop and somebody jams over the size of the pot into you, and it looks like they thought about it for a second, you're going to really think about it with pocket sevens if the board is 9-5-2, because that's not something you see every day. If you raise with pocket sevens and somebody shoves 14x, you're going to call and you're going to get to realize your equity. Anytime you get somebody to fold out their equity share of the pot, that is a huge victory mathematically. And we go into a lot of that, right? Due to it's my effort. I only had 100,000 words, so I had to be pretty concise. I got a lot into the book, though. I got pretty much everything, I think. I had a list of topics I really wanted to go through, and I picked the ones that I thought would be the most helpful. And when people are, and my thing is, like, I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying this is what the math says, right? And if the math says it and you disagree, I want you to show me where the math is wrong. If you can do that and you can show me, I will stand corrected and I will be very happy. I have had a lot of really good players say, there was one time I was doing way back when poker was a little different. We were talking about this in the intro. I think this was right when I started teaching, and I think this was one of my very first webinars. And this stable that had about 30 guys who play like 10Ks regularly hired me, right? And they hired me to come in, and all the players were just like, why do we have to show up for this? Alex isn't even on the tour anymore. I just because I don't like being on the tour. I don't like living out of a hotel room 240 days of the year. It's just not my style. So I'm coming in there, and it's a tough room to begin with, right? And I show them something from that eventually got into why Pisagno was right. And I said, okay, so it's actually better to raise fold here as opposed to move all in. And everybody started going, that is so bad. Oh my God, you're so terrible. I was like, $5,000 if anybody can prove me wrong. And I sat there. Nobody said a effing word. Nobody said a word. I was like, because you don't know. You don't know. This is what you've done your entire life. There's a ton of stories like this in history. No, we've never done it this way. No, we've never done it this way. We can't do it this way. A man can't fly a machine in the air. What are you talking about? That's never been seen before. But if you can prove it's... I put that challenge out there because I knew nobody, just based on the discussion we had previously, I could tell none of them had ever done an equity calc, right? They were all... By the way, all of them, save for a couple, were fantastically talented poker players and better poker players than me, but they had no reasoning behind their methodology. And I'm not saying I'm right with a lot of this stuff. I'm saying this is the process. As far as I can tell, this should be the process for everybody. If it's not, tell me. If I can update it in the blog in a future book, but I'm pretty sure the cool thing with me is if I'm wrong about anything, I have a bunch of like really hungry pros that I work with who are like, this looks wrong. This looks wrong. And I have to go back and I have to prove either it's right or I have to go, oh, it is wrong. Check that out. And a lot of people, this is, after years and years of work, the myth of poker talent is pretty much all this stuff that I know it pretty much for sure works out. And there's a lot of fun stuff in that. We do an example. We set up an equity calc. What happens if, we have one time where a guy calls on the board and we know the best hand he could have is top pair. What happens if you close your eyes and you bet turn and river, any turn or river? And the guy calls you with third pair on the river, does that turn a profit? Now, a lot of people will go, there's no way in hell that turns a profit. Have you ever proven it? You have to go in and see if you can prove these things. And what we do prove is you can triple barrel down really light and still turn a profit. And that if you watch high stakes players, the really fun stuff is when you really get into this, when you watch like a Durr or like an Isildur 1, you're going to start really understanding what they're thinking. I don't even know if they think like this, but you'll start understanding why it works. And that's when poker becomes really exciting. And I really get a charge out of seeing somebody who poker was a very fun game, but maybe a little mystifying before, and seeing it all open up to them. And it's even better if they can take it into a way that they can change their lives.
That's awesome. I cannot wait for it. You said, it sounded like you had you said you have a $100,000 word limit. So your publisher kind of put a limit on the number of words you could use?
They said like, we want something around 100,000 words, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I could have written something a lot longer, but there's also a time, it's not their fault. It's also, let's say you write 2,000 words a day. Well, that's 50. It'll take you 50 days to write that book. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot, but you think about it. I still play poker quite a bit. I still teach. I have 1,000+ students that I have to meet with every day, and I have a lot of things going on, right? So maybe 4 days a week I get to write 2,000 words. Well, it's gonna end up being quite a few weeks for you to finish that out, and then you got to go through and you got to mark what doesn't really fit in with the context of the book and stuff like that. And but I got all the topics that I really wanted in. The book publisher is supposed to go, hey, let's keep it to a certain amount, because if we make this too long, and essentially I probably could have written longer and they would have gone for it. But at the same time, they requested a certain book by a certain date and they paid for that. So I wanted to really honor that. So, and I think it didn't take anything away. I had a list of everything I wanted to get into the book. I got everything in there, and I still need to develop more material if I'm going to release a sequel. So it's everything I wanted to get in got in there.
Great. Good. I cannot wait for it. It's called The Myth of Poker Talent. And when that does get published, would you mind coming back on the podcast and talking about it?
Yes, sir. We can definitely.
Great. Awesome. Well, I would be remiss if I have Alexander Fitzgerald on my podcast and I actually don't ask him any kind of strategy question. So if you don't mind, I have one strategy question I'd love to get your feedback on.
Let's go for it.
All right. Well, I have a listener who sent in a poker leak of his. He said that his leak comes in MTT late stage play when it's probably about the final 18 players or so. He has a 20 BB stack, but he's surrounded by 10 to 15 BB stacks. How should he approach this situation? And how does he study this off the tables to get better?
Okay, that's a wonderful question. If you guys do sign up for the Professionals Mindset and you do get why Pisecno is right, that's literally all we talk about for 3 or 4 hours. So it's
perfect.
I almost felt like you led that in, like you purposefully built that for me. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah.
Whoever sent this in, and yeah, Sky. But essentially, the thing to realize is this actually does help you with a lot of your steals because the person can't 3-bet bluff you. One thing to really look for is their full big blind to steal. Generally, you should keep your steals to the cutoff and the button. Once you get to the hijack, mathematically, it's going to be very difficult to make a very good steal. It's still possible, but a lot of times when I'm teaching guys, I don't want to teach. The Pareto principle is that 80% of your results will come from 20% of the inputs. This is raising from the hijack is not one of those really high value inputs. It's a ton of work for not much profit. So I tell people to usually avoid it. Play from the button, play from the cutoff, play from the small blind. The first thing you need to look at is the full to steal number. So let's start with the small blind, which would be the smartest. The most simple. There's an article called The Simple Adjustment on WPT Magazine. You can just Google The Simple Adjustment, WPT, Alex Fitzgerald, and it'll come up. Essentially, I was playing cash games for a living, 7 years ago, when I was first on the European tour, and just to pay my bills. And I was trying to find every way that I could make a profit. And I was trying everything, like check raising more boards, trying more triple barrel bluffs. The thing that gave me more profit, raised my win rate by 20%, I was really surprised by, was when I improved my small blind play. Essentially, if you raise to 3x, you're actually making it 2.5x. And when you make it 2.5x, you're typically raising, excuse me, you're typically raising 2.5x to win about 5x. So that bet needs to work about 50% of the time, which means your opponent needs to defend with 50% of the hands. If you've ever taken a look at what 50% of the hands is, that goes down to 6-4 offsuit. Most people are not defending with 6-4 offsuit to a full 3x raise. But you can be even more sure that they're not doing that if the person's fold to steal is high enough. If you see the person's fold to steal is 64% per se, that means your raise needs to work 50% of the time. It's actually going to work 64% of the time. So you're turning a great profit. That's a 14% edge. If you can remember the movie 21, where the kids were flying around and strapping money to their chest and stuff like that, that was a 1% edge they were pushing. This is a 14% edge. Furthermore, there's another really helpful statistic, full big blind to small blind steal. It's really important you have that one up as well, because people change very much when it comes to position. A lot of people, when they see you raise out of position, they go, nobody would do that without a hand eye fold. A lot of people go like, how dare you raise out of position? I'm in position. I'm going to call and I'm going to do something about it. Same thing happens with the button. Some people see the button raise and they go, it's a position raise, I call. Other people say, it's a position, I'm out of position. It's a position raise, I'm out of position. I just don't want to do that. So you want to really know how they react to steals from different positions. Now, you go with that, and let's talk about the button. When you raise from the button, you should generally be raising to 2.5x. The reason for that is most of my calculations. This is in the Myth of Poker Talent. 2.5x raises, it really easy for people to become unprofitable if they call 2.5x out of position. It's really easy for people to make a profit if they flat a 2x raise. But if you make it 2.5x, a lot of people, when they see the 2.5x raise, they go, okay, well, I can't fold because I'm getting a good price, but this is kind of an old school player. He might not be raising as wide, so I'm going to be a little more careful. That is completely incorrect. If you're going to call out of position, you need to check raise more, donk lead more, check call more. You are investing more money. Logically, you have to defend more. Mathematically, you need to defend more. And a lot of people take the opposite tack. They take the opposite tactic. I recently almost final tabled a 5K at the PCA, and I busted the final 2 tables. I write down notes on my phone. These were my notes these were my big pots. All in flip, lost. All in flip, lost. 9s versus 8s, lost. And, my wife was like, oh my God, do you feel bad? And I was like, well, not really, because I have no idea how I got this far. And I got a good cash out of it. So I started looking through my notes. This was every note. Raise to 2.5x, guy calls, guy check folds. Raise to 2.5x, guy check calls 1. Gives me too much value out of position. Every single pot was me raising to 2.5x and people calling, not knowing what to do or folding. Just out and out folding. People are a lot more scared to 3-bet the 2.5x. That's now a big scary raise these days. So they just don't go after it as much as they could. The thing you need to realize is the 2.5x, the 2x raise is dated. The 2x back when DJK 123 and Watch the Sea introduced it back in 2008, it was a very good adjustment because back then the general poker public had a very rejam intensive game, which was really smart because back then people were raising to 2.5x and 3x and people were not calling big rejams, because if you can remember back then, people would say things like, don't go broke with a queen in your hand. I can't call it all in with ace 10, stuff like that. So people were raising huge amounts and folding preposterously good hands when they did get rejammed in. Eventually, everybody started adjusting to that. The 2x was a good adjustment because everybody back then was a position Nazi, and they were like, you cannot call out of the big blind. So you would just raise the 2x. That 2x raise needed to work like 4% of the time with the blinds and antes all put in there, and it would work something like 60% of the time. And a lot of times, the way you figure it out, so let's say you raise the 2.5x on the button, that bet needs to work 48% of the time. The way you can figure out if it just works as like a raise, like nothing else, like somebody calls, the board comes 10 10 10, you have 10 7, the guy checks to you, you open fold. The way to find out if just your raise was profitable is you take how often your bet needs to work, you divide how much you're risking divided by the entire pot. So you do 2.5x divided by 5.3x, the entire pot with your bet included, because you receive your bet back when you win the pot, right? So you take how often that needs to work, and then you take the folding ranges of the small blind and big blind. So create a range on Flopzilla. It's like, I think he's re-raising with these hands and calling with these hands. You put that together, say that's 30%. Then you have 70% folding. Let's say both of them are playing, and the other guy's playing 40% of the hand. So it's a 60% folding range. Then what you do is reduce them to fractions. This is where your 8th grade math skill is going to come in. You do 0.7 times 0.6 in your calculator. Very simple. And then you get their combined folding ranges. If that is higher than how often you needed your bet to work, then you should be doing that raise with pretty much any 2 cards. You don't want to do it so often that you break the ATM, but you should be trying to do it you should be pretty cavalier about what you do it with. If it's under that, you need to have a plan for the flop. Does the guy call a lot? And then does he check fold? Is his fold to C-bet really high? Well, good. You can raise. It's fine, because now the guy's just going to be able to check fold. And to do these short stack situations, Card Runner ZV is excellent. Card Runner ZV is really good for short stack situations. It's very simple to solve for, and it'll let you know whether it's profitable or not. You can just compute a couple different ranges, make a very miniature tree of options. He calls with these hands, he re-raises with these hands he check folds, these hands he check jams all in, and you find out if it turns a profit or not. To learn how to use Card Runner ZV, there's a number of wonderful free videos on online. Now, the person who created that is the programmer, and the programmer, he's very intense about how he teaches it. If you want to see some practical applications, you can see it on cardrunners.com. with me using CardRunners EV. You can get on cardrunners.com for $30, by the way. You get, just use promo code free month, and that gives you 80% off. And then, excuse me. And if you want to see also why Ape Styles is right, another webinar I did shows like step-by-step how to do it. And the Myth of Poker Talent will show you how to do it. So there's a lot of different resources for showing you how to do it. But CardRunners EV is pretty simple. It's essentially you can put like the hand history in there, and then you adjust everybody's hand ranges, and then you hit EV compute. It's a little confusing the first time, and it's a little overwhelming the first time. But if you keep whacking at it, you're gonna figure it out. So if you're raising from the cutoff, this is when it becomes a little. This is when the steals become a little tougher. You need to get the combined folding ranges of the small blind and big blind, but now you have to add in the cold calling range and the 3-betting range together for the big blind, take whatever's left, and then you got to multiply that as well. So let's say he plays 15% of the hands from the button. So now you would do 0.85 times 0.7 times 0.6, and then whatever shoots out the end is the combined folding range of everybody, right? If your raise clears that, you can make that raise very wide. You should be very careful about raising the crappy aces. That used to be a really good play back when people jammed or fold, back when people would jam or fold. But these days, people are much more prone to just flat you in position. So like, I just don't even bother with ace-6 offsuit or anything like that. I just don't open it unless the button is just really shut down. What you're going to find as you do more math like that is it's pretty hard to make a cutoff raise work as just a complete bluff. And I think that people really play up their cutoff. I really worked on improving my button in small blind, and my win rate really shot up with tournaments. I work on this like every year. I worked on it in tournaments last year. My tournament big blind per 100 was between 7 and 9 last year, depending on the site. And a lot of that was high stakes tournaments. And it was all work from the small blind and button, just stealing more and it's even more important to not steal when it's not a good idea. So there's sometimes you have like ace-4 off, but both of the guys to your left are just jamming all the time. And, you don't want to raise fold, so you got to jam there. But there's sometimes you have like a decent hand, and let's say both guys have like 20x, right? You don't want to jam on both of them because it's a very slight profit. But if you raise, you're raise folding a lot of the time. If you can avoid that spot, that's a huge win, right? Because you're just paying attention. But if you're paying really good attention, you're going to find there's a lot of spots everybody's just folding too much, and there's a lot of spots people are just flatting 2.5x. And check folding too much. And yeah, I hope that gives you some good guidelines, and best of luck to you.
Well, shit, yeah, it does. You dropped those are some crazy knowledge bombs. That was awesome. Thank you so much. I'm sure the listener, I think it was Dom, my listener Dom, who sent in that question. I'm sure he'll get a lot out of it without a doubt.
Oh, cool, man. No, I'm really glad to help.
Awesome. Yeah, well, Alex, it was an incredible pleasure having you on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure the listeners do as well.
Oh, thank you, man. I'm really glad to have you on here. Hey, and thank you guys for supporting Sky. Sky works his ass off. He's one of our listeners who, like, he's the one who we have the most banner with. Like, sends in the best questions, and we send back stuff. Like this guy works so hard. You guys are in good hands listening to this guy. This is definitely a guy trying to make it happen. So you guys are doing well.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Alex. I do have one last question. What is the best way for the listeners to get in touch with you and to experience the genius poker insights that you have to offer?
You can write me at assassinacoaching@gmail.com if you guys want to talk about private lessons. My autoresponder will go back to you really quick with a bunch of details. I'll go ahead and read your email within a couple days, and if there's anything you asked that I don't think that autoresponder properly responded to, I'll go ahead and write back to you. And I'll probably just say hi if you write anyway. And be sure to check me out on twitch.tv/theassassinato. Check out my podcast at oneouter.com. Also, sign up for my newsletter. That's probably the best way if you guys want to get a lot of free content. Go to pokerheadrush.com. your two places to get a lot of free content are pokerheadrush.com. That's kind of that's my fun site. I have a lot of trip reports, blogs. I review movies. I was a journalist before poker. I used to write video game reviews. That was my job. I do like movie reviews, music reviews, and stuff like that. There's a lot of fun stuff, the battle rap videos, and there's a lot of strategy articles. We try to get 1 or 2 strategy articles up every week. And if you write in to, you don't have to write in, excuse me. If you sign up for the newsletter on pokerheadrush.com, you just enter your email, that's it, and then you opt in. You will get a letter from me every Thursday, and it's pretty much just a summary of everything I've been doing, because I publish for a lot of different blogs in a lot of different magazines, and they kind of go everywhere. Sometimes an article will get published somewhere like Ireland and it doesn't get published anywhere else. I go ahead and get the licenses, I get the permissions, I send them to you guys, and if anything got published during the week, we send there. Any YouTube videos went up, we put it there. And what you end up getting is a lot of strategy content for free every Thursday. And if you want to sign up for the premium content, like the Professional's Mindset, you'll hear about it there first. So a lot of these, like this webinar does cap out. We do not have like unlimited seats, so you get first shot at it if you're, and a lot of times we do discounts and stuff like that if you sign up for the newsletter. And yeah, if you guys want to like up your game as much as humanly possible, check out the Professional's Mindset. You can go to my website. It'll be under the strategy section if you want to see the flyer. Go to the website pokerheadrush.com. You can also go to alexanderfitzgerald.com, and it's right under the strategy section. It's called the Professional's Mindset. That'll have all the details. And if you're confused about anything or have any questions, write me at assassinacoaching@gmail.com. I'll be sure to answer them for you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alex. And you have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you on Saturday for the webinar.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to once again thank Alex for joining me today. You can find everything that Alex and I discussed in the show notes at smartpokerstudy.com/pod43, so head on over. And if you sign up for the webinar, let him know via email that you heard it through the podcast, and he'll send you a copy of his awesome webinar, Why Pisagno Was Right. And of course, thank you all for listening. Send me your constructive feedback through the show notes page at smartpokerstudy.com/pod43. You can also send an email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com, tweet me at smartpokerstudy, or post in the Facebook group at smartpokerstudy.com/discuss. And I need your questions for the Friday episodes. Please send them to me through all the channels just mentioned, and get your 27% rake back on America's Card Room by clicking the banner near the top of the show notes page. Alrighty, poker people, be sure to listen to tomorrow's episode number 44, where I answer some more of your poker questions. And I hope to see you at Alex's webinar on Saturday. Word of mouth is the best advertising, and a recommendation from you to your friends would be most appreciated. If you enjoyed our time together and learned a little something, please share it with your next door neighbor. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.